Okay, welcome to my workshop. In the video game that I play that's associated with Dungeons and Dragons, Neverwinter, they've given us our workshop, and I've shown you quite a few times. Their folklore actually goes along with ancient beliefs and ancient mythologies and things, and this is no different at all what I'm going to show you today. I thought during the holidays here I would show you a little bit of Christmas magic. I did a short video where I showed some symbology that's actually into a winter event that they have that corresponds to Christmas, of course, and the year event. My place here faces right out to the end of the solstice, and indeed the middle window above the awning is lit up quite well. If it was done correctly, it'd be making a beam across here, and perhaps I would put something that throughout the year might be inconspicuous whatsoever, but on this little pole right here might be a symbol. Also, there in the roof here might have been a hole that has been put in there, and as the sun goes across and back, it arcs across little lines across the hole all throughout the year, but whenever it reaches Christmas, it'll get to a certain point, like say here, exactly where my bullseye is, and then you'll know it's Christmas, or you'll know it's the winter solstice, if you will. So what are we going to look at here? Well, let's look around at the place here. Here's my foreman that's here, and I've got a few people working for me, all kinds of apparatuses and a lot of books and things like that they've got associated with it here, and alembics and weighing scales and so on. And here's my major office that's here, and it's got some stuff on it too, and I click on the feather and I get to work through that and look at new people to work and replace some of these people and stuff. There's a bulletin board here for what might be needed, but there's also whenever I build something or order it in, I get it here. And if this girl doesn't get to work right here, Viga, pretty soon, instead of just sitting around, I'm going to end up getting somebody to replace her. But of course, her counterpart would still be there. If you look here, I've got this huge crucible hooked up here, and it's going through a heating process. And here is a great bellows that I'm on, and normally it'd be hooked up over here to a springy branch to something like maybe even this post that's over here, and to a rope that's on the top of it keeping it up. But of course I weigh more, and as I push down on the thing, it'd start puffing and going like crazy, and you can see it putting out smoke into the roof. Now we looked at earlier, and this is a two-story, so let's look at this real quick. Just want to show you a few things that go along with this, other than the fact that this is built by Woodwrights and has a lot of things associated with it that you would normally think of in a boat. There's also jewels and jewel stones and gems that I can make, and then weighing scales and metals, dyes, and well, dyes is over there. This is actually potions in my potion station here, and here are dyes. And where there's a red dye, and I think we're going to talk about that today because, hell, it's one of the major components of Christmas, isn't it? And I'll show you how that goes all along with it. And we're also going to talk about Saturn, because this is Saturnalia in the end of the 12 days of Christmas and how that all works together. There's a green and a blue dye that's there too, and then there's that strange Phoenician purple. Yeah, I know how to make it too. It's amazing. Here's little samples of that dye and dyeing leather and everything, and with some of them you have to use gloves because there are some toxic elements associated with these guys and all kinds of stuff that you wouldn't believe, but it's magic. It's alchemy. Oh, there's this heat dome that's here that's taking all the smoke out so everybody isn't choking up here, and leather working table and stuff, and what you would know of as sawhorses that are here, and leather working and curing, and even a thing that you can make into a dark room, if you will. Certain of these alchemy things have to be done a certain way. Here's a mirror and a lot of scrolls that can help us with certain ways to do things, and even a skull. Ooh. Well, let's see if we can wrap this all together here after one more quick look downstairs. Sorry for jumping around so much, but so I can look through this worn toolbox here, and I've got all kinds of extra things. I've already got blue and purple items of every single one of these, so whenever I have them do a task for me, they can end up using those. This is just extra and so on, and you can also buy these and everything. But there's worn alembics. It's like a distillery, yeah, that you could use in making hooch or something like that, but it can be used in a lot of other ways too. And so even a worn crossbow, nets, hatchets, things like that. But I've got a group of those over there, and a bow, and scythe. What has that got to do with Saturn and Christmas? Well, Father Christmas really holds a scythe in his hand for the original Saturn, and of course the Grim Reaper of the year and the Winter Warlock held something like that in him. And let's just look here where I can create things here. So we're looking at Alchemy. Ooh, hopefully it'll show up. Sometimes it's too blurry. But with this I can make distilled water. And of course it requires, if you look to the right, well water. Alright, so I'm just distilling water. Bone glue requires animal bones and animal hide, and you can make this glue out of it. Yeah, that's actually true, and they have this stuff that you can make it. Soot and distilled water and bone glue makes poppers or cheap ink, like jailhouse tattoo ink. There's even nettles can help you make a minor healing potion. Weak poison, and this is a toadstool type poison that just puts you through sickness for a while and won't necessarily kill you. Workman's balm, which is also made from nettle and has a UVB effect and everything for those workmen and everything. All kinds of potions that are here, and they come in different colors and strengths. And when you're first starting out, you can't use the better ones. You have to use the smaller ones and then work your way up. But antler glues, and then of course we can get to worse poisons, like this one has nightshade on it, and one component of beast blood. Paralyzing is the easy paralyzing is tarantula venom and beast blood. Sleeping vial goes with nerium. This is a plant that's known to sedate people and stuff. And so it goes on from here, right? You can probably see the idea of what is going on. Second level healing potions and so on like that. Well, it gets up to here, and you'll notice that there's strong paralyzing vial, and it uses the venom of an adder and quicksilver. What's quicksilver? Well, that's Mercury. So not only are we going to talk about Saturn, we're going to talk about Mars and Mercury and a couple other guys too. Yeah, you have to invoke all these guys in a magical sense to make all this happen. But when you say that you're invoking them and everybody thinks like, oh, what do you do, just call out to him and things? No, you're using the knowledge derived from all these things that's spent up over thousands and thousands of years. So look at quicksilver here for a second. It requires that I use cinnabar. If you see that over here at the right there, cinnabar. I've used 3 cinnabar and I can get quicksilver off that. What's that got to do with everything? Well, there's also another product here we're going to talk about, and this is vitriol. And vitriol requires 3 brimstone. Yeah, like fire and brimstone, sometimes associated with dragons. To make brimstone, I think you used to have to use red rock, and then something like that, red ore or red rock, and it took 3 of those to make 1 brimstone. You had 3. Now they've got it to where you can just get this stuff and acquire it pretty easy. Like there's merchants making it happen, and as it's all evolved in the game, you're able to go to the next level rather than having to go through so many tasks to perform something here. But make no mistake about it, whenever you start to get up here in larger tasks, you end up having to have these things that you've made and derived out of other things that you put with other things, which with other things. And this vitriol is real important. It's used in a solvent in a lot of ways, and you solvent this red brimstone, and it ends up having ability that looks gold in the picture here, if you can make it out. And so there always was this alchemy wanting to turning things to gold, right? And get some magic going. Well, let's see if we can get some magic fires going here, and I'll go ahead and switch out of this game and get to something that I can show you just a piece of alchemy and how this all works in Saturn, I guess. So here we're looking at a depiction, and I don't know, I'm going to read it to you, so I don't think it's quite clear enough to read, no matter how big your little screen is there. But what you'll notice on the side maybe is that vial that has like a kid in it and stuff. over on the left, that looks just like that vial of vitriol in the game we were just in. And there are some symbols that go along with this. Along with this picture on the left, the second picture on the bottom is a dragon with a golden belly, but he is a red dragon, and he's gone around and biting his tail, and this is this serpent or omphalos and the circulature of the world and the spinning of time and so on like that. Now, Saturn, of course, is associated with time as far as chronos and things in chronology and chronometry and things like that. It goes to the Wayback Machine, and quite often always has a sickle associated with him. Even Ninurta, the Sumerian god, came from out of a grain god type of person, and that's the same thing that happens both in the Greek and the Roman that we get Saturn from and Cronus, respectively. But so when we look at Saturn, there are some symbols that are usually associated with him. You see this one here and this one here. And I'm going to try to zoom in on it a little bit more here, but I think it's going to go out the top. Yeah, it's going to go out the top. Well, let's go back then. For if you look, what this is this Christian cross. Make no mistake about it, and I could have done it with that door frame up there and the light coming through and so on. So what we have here is a cross, and then it has something attached to it. And if you look at this one here, that's really a sickle held right next to it. People have made weird things out of it, and yeah, it does have a cursive, a font effect to it, but the other form of it you'll see quite often too is just a cross, and where it comes down to the bottom becomes a crescent. Now, people say this goes with moonisms and so on, and it definitely does too, because at certain moons they call and the harvest. At certain moons they plant certain crops and things like this. It ran through from the Wayback Machine, lunar calendars, hooking up with sun symbology that worked for all year. The bottom left picture that we see, or bottom right picture that we see here, is a poppy. It's shown in Hinduism and stuff, and there's a circulature done. What would be the dots on each leaf of the poppy into another secondary circle, inside of which is a square. This is a symbol of the earth, as we've talked about in sacred geometry, and this is squaring the circle shown here. It's kind of a Shiva Linga shown here in the center of it too, and a connection of it. Quite often in this depiction, and especially hooked up with one certain chakra, that you'll see an elephant in this position. Whenever you do so, you know that they're referring to lead, because it is the most heaviest creature. In fact, lead is also associated with Saturn. And why would that be? Well, it's a slow-moving, constant planet, and so no matter which way they thought things were, they had a slow prediction on it. It became pretty easy, where some planets do an 8-year cycle to come back, and certain star points showed 8 points on them and so on, to do certain aesthetic showings to you, I guess. The other ones had different times. Ones that are very close, like Mercury and Mars and so on, go through a fast period. We're about to get into Mercury, but then also there are others that have a 12 and 20 year period. And the Saturn we were talking about in the other video here recently that I did about them, and probably I'll release it at the same time, tells you it goes through a 29 year period. It's a little over that, but roughly that same period of time here. So when we look at this symbology that we have going on here, again, then we have this vitriol concept, and it's sitting on, well, let's just see if we can let it get closer to it as we talk about it, and maybe we get a little bit closer. In this symbology here, they're showing people working and so on, a man grabbing water from a well and collecting it into a device, people bartering and so on. There's an old crone lady that's here. On the right hand side, there is a lady making up some type of ladling or stewing device. Some man that's right here is collecting and catching his pigs. There's a dead one already in a trough of a season, going to be marked here. On the upper left that you see right here is a beggar, which doesn't have his legs, by the way, and he is begging. from people that are much better off than he. And at this time, there's a give and take. It's definitely in shape. And if you looked into Saturnalia and the way things get to be flipped, it shows you that in the connective source here. There's also a funeral procession up here on the very far left where they're carrying a coffin, which is shown to be striped to kind of pinpoint it out because kind of small in this picture. Also, in your right hand side here is a tree that's getting barren and losing its leaves, but then there's an old man that's a plowman or a farmer and his son working with each other, pulling along a plow, plowing a field, and you reap what you sow. Coming into vision here also, in actually a sacred geometry form, if we went back and stopped and looked at it, is a picture here of that vial, which has to do with glass, which is pretty important when we start talking about what vitriol ends up coming out to be in these things. And this coil that you see around the bottom of it, that looks kind of like what Caesar had up on his head or so on, but also is representative of a dragon coiling around onto it, just like Yggdrasil and other places. For what is actually being shown here in this art is a dragon, and the kid is taking a vial, much like he's in, like a genie in a bottle, and putting it down the dragon's throat. And there's this small kid here, he's a redhead, and this is a representation of Saturn. And another conspicuous thing is at the top of the bottle, it is capped off with being sealed, like a light bulb in a way, ding, but then there's also a crown sealed around it at this exact height. Over in your right, and you can probably barely make it out, but there's a stanza of three things, and it looks like the dying of Christ and crucifixions, only there's two, and then a hanging gallows, and that hanging gallows, there's somebody hanging, and there's a tree, and there's somebody hanging on a tree. Well, I can show you there's a few places in the Bible that says Jesus killed hanging on a tree, much like Odin and so on. This same picture is topped off with poppies right there, and then the top picture that you see there, this is Saturn, and it's being pulled by serpents. In the other video we looked at, one is facing one way, one's facing the other, but in this situation it's a griffin, and their tails are entwined, making a caduceus or a helix. Instead of it being a chariot, it's laid back like Santa's sled, and it's pulled along, and it's a four-wheeled cart being pulled along through the sky. We see this symbology quite often. He even has the little beard and the cap that's on and the whole 9 yards. In fact, ding, first down. So let's look at the esoteric knowledge that's derived over here and how it works together, I guess. So over here, well, let's see if I can zoom in. Well, you're still not going to be able to see it much better. Saturn. Here within that crucible we're looking at, this vitriol potion, the dragon is being fed vitriol. Now, vitriol is a solvent, and it is sulfuric acid. And being burnt, hence the bellows, the character in the background are common working folks and peasants. A body is being carried away for burial in the back left. The poor beg for change. Kronos rides in a chariot atop, pulled by dragons. Saturn incarnates energies of old age, death, drudgery, and pain. Saturn is the slowest of the 7 planets and takes 29 years to orbit the sun. The alchemical process was likely here of liberating Mercury from cinnabar. As I just showed you alchemy from there, but getting Mercury, there's another planet, and its whole effect, a mineral commonly called dragon's blood in the Middle Ages, and the metal here is lead. Now, you always want to turn lead into gold. and perhaps we'll get back to that. For we're talking about different aspects of alchemy and how it works with archaeoastronomy and geometric shapes here. And so we see he's pouring acid into the phoenix or the dragon that's shown here, and it's a red dragon. Now, in some of our stories, dragons breathe fire and so on, and fires become very important. That's put in at this certain point, and in fact, this is showing that. But other forms of dragons spit acid and do things, and vitriol is really a form of acid. In fact, this red vitriol we're talking about, it's made and used with cinnabar to end up procuring mercury, and then getting a procured cinnabar or red ochre, ding, its byproduct is mercury, but it is actually sulfuric acid. Yeah, now there's a whole way to end up procuring this vitriol here, but there are a lot of other forms of vitriol. And when they first found these, they're associated with minerals, which again are hooked up with geometrical shapes, as we talked about before. But these minerals would grow in themselves, leaching out of rocks from this sulfuric type compound. And these people were able to figure it out, but then they were also able to figure out how to derive the thing that caused the effect. Now, this is chemistry, but that's also alchemy. But alchemy is using all this other pent-up knowledge that goes along with it, but strangely, it actually worked. Now, when we were in the shop there a minute ago, we looked up and we saw that cinnabar is there and the brimstone, and we have got to do that to end up making mercury. And mercury is an extremely precious material at one time. And so you can look at something like this liquid mercury. For mercury is metal, and it's like silver instead of like gold, but it is already in a molten state just at room temperature. It's magic. Well, you can put it in a little straw type effect, and it actually expands and contracts more than water, and alcohol can be used. And by the way, alcohol is another form of vitriol extract that you can end up getting. Yeah, there's ones different colors and everything. That's what that one table was all about, was forming different types of vitriol for different things to have to do. But we're talking about this one with red ochre, because procured red ochre being burnt, and they know that, to end up forming it out of rock and ore are going way, way back. We've looked in some of our videos at Blombos Cave down in the South African Cape at over 100,000 years, although they're backed off at 92, I think, and they think they've got it pinned down where this mother of pearl shell had it all procured and made up with it. Use that, and then use derived animal fat cooked down to a certain way, like a Crisco grease type thing, and a few other things, heat it up all together and then run it. So they had a whole workshop for this going. But red ochre can be seen in these people, which we talked about. All of Cro-Magnon burials basically are associated with it, and it comes all the way through the Natufians, the people that are associated with Catalhoyuk, Göbekli Tepe, early people that were founding civilizations, the Natufians and so on, all the way into Egypt, but also in the Holy Land, if you will. Burials found in all the way around the Mediterranean, a crescent there, and in fact, way over the east too. And in fact, we've seen it in quite a few burials we talk about in the Proto-Indo-European lands in the far northeast. But it can also be found in the New World. And whenever I did my whole video on red ochre symbology, you can see that it was in a time well before the Indians came across, or whatever you're talking about, because there are certain things associated with it, and this red ochre symbology and all this other things. No, they're not necessarily laying themselves on the left side of the body facing to the east, and that's directly towards the east. No, it's not necessarily, but a lot of them have that hooked up with it too. So again, we had that color gold earlier coming out of brimstone somehow. Well, it's not gold, it's silver, but there's this special element here that, no, it's a secret thing. And it's worth a whole lot of money to certain people. In fact, in the Orient, way over there in the East, it was worth a whole lot of money. And so you could sell it with its worth for gold. And so there's a way that you could sit and take this red rock and turn it into gold. If you follow me. Well, at first it's quicksilver, and you can drive it out of it. Now, this rock we're looking at, they used to call this, all the way even the Middle Ages, dragon's blood rock. Of course, this is associated with dragons, and we've talked about who those people were and so on. And those people, of course, knew about the value and the mercury that comes out of it, but also they knew how to take the mercury out of it. Because people use this for sunblock and other things on them and all kinds of stuff. And you don't want to get too much mercury in you. That can screw you up. And apparently they had figured that out in the Wayback Machine in a way to pull it out of it using natural things that you can drive. Like a super concentrated vinegar. But no, it gets to the point of being an acid, and it's caustic. And so it would eat it up. And whenever it does so, it leaves behind some mercury or any of the mercury out of it. Mercury, of course, congeals and puddles all up. You can end up extracting it out of it, and it won't have that effect. You do so while you're also burning the heck out of it at high temperature, and so it fractionates it out, and there's a chemical response and everything that hooks up with this. Now, how old is this? Well, that thing that I was showing you here with the knowledge on it goes back to the Middle Ages. In fact, at one time, just like that workshop there, if they would have found some of the stuff that's in my workshop, they'd be pretty ticked off. So here's this vitriol over at the left, and the way that they're able to drive something out, and it's an ancient thing, much kept secret, just like the way to make purple dye and the way to make a lot of things that for some people was an extra way to life, and they didn't want necessarily to have everybody to have the trick. But in doing so, we almost lost a few things, like Egyptian blue, like Phoenician purple in true form of it, rather than trying to mimic it, although now we can do it chemically and get the same exact effect, so without having to kill stinky snails. But this red that we used all hooks up with it, and red has something to do with mercury, and red can be bad too, right? Well, you remember when you were a kid, if you're old enough, there used to be this stuff called a mercurochrome, and make no mistake, that's mercury and chromium. And it has this red dye that's hooked up with it too, and it's supposed to help disinfect and cuts and scratches and help you heal up. They figured out with the amount of mercury you're getting there, even though it's just a little bit latent in that stuff still, you don't want to just keep putting it in you. People talk about nowadays that can screw up kids and give autism, all kinds of things. Well, that'd be a stronger amount, but you don't want to keep shoving mercury. And of course, fish nowadays, and there's this problem with mercury consumption and buildup, things like that that's going on. In fact, if you look into it, old elder magician and magi used to take and have people drink pellets or drink potions that had things like this in it. And while maybe a little bit would cause a therapeutic effect for a while, it starts to slowly afterwards poison your body. In fact, they realized a long time ago keeping water that was distilled inside of lead containers rather than any other type of container would leave the water tasting sweet. So it's sweet water. Well, leaded water isn't good, just like leaded gas isn't good, and that's not so much a great idea. It's got latent lead in it, and that's what's giving you that sweet flavor. So they have to keep things in glass. And notice that pottery ain't going to work either. It'll just eat right through that. This is where glazing comes in handy, and being able to glaze some type of object with crystals and dust and heat it up to a point that it glazes and puts a glass on it that ends up making it to where acid doesn't affect with it. In fact, glass blowing itself ends up coming out of derived guys that had to do with alchemy. It had to do with chemistry. This is the point where we're putting three things together in Hermes Trismegistus, where we get philosophy and alchemy and religion, or archaeoastronomy, if you will, astrotheology, and you're putting it all together, and it's still working. It didn't work perfectly, and it wasn't just like ta-da. And once we figured out the periodic elements, things became a lot more evident. And once we made a few polymers and things going on, we were like, oh, in modern day chemistry, make no doubt about it, people can just take a few powders and this, that, and the other and go, boom, there's plastic. Or boom, there's this, there's that. It's amazing. It's literally magic. Anything that you took like this and back into medieval, they go, oh, you've got to be some kind of wizard thing or something, Wizard of Oz, freak out. Yeah, you might even get killed for it. Hell, you'd probably get killed for just having a Bic lighter. Run into the wrong group. So we've attached a Mercury and this quicksilver to this cinnabar and this ancient red ochre that people have used since the Wayback Machine all the way up into modern times. Certain forms of red dye, though, were bad. Anybody remember the red M&M scare, and of course red dye being taken out of everything? Yeah, there was lead paints and this, that, and the other goes on to it. What's lead got to do with it? Well, if you remember, lead gets turned into gold. Right. Well, is there a way that you can just go boo and turn lead into gold? Ironically, they figured out now running actually one in the strongest magnets possible. I don't know if you've ever seen this effect, but they took and levitated a frog inside of a super electromagnet. And he just hovers there. It's a little frog. Well, they took a piece of lead and they set it in there too, and it slowly turns this little chunk about the size of a regular six-sided dice, a little smaller actually, into gold. Well, how long does that take? It took a few days for it to do it all the way through and so on. But it starts doing it in pieces all the way through it and everything. It's not like a coating working its way in or from the inside out. But also in that effect, they were like, wow, we figured out how to make gold. So how much gold did we make? Well, it's about worth $140, $150. They go, that's badass. Problem is, the energy we had to run through the machine to do it was about $17,000. And it's not going to work. No matter how much you want to do, and all we're doing is making things about the size of a dice. Yeah, just like they figured out how to make diamonds now, you can literally put superheat and pressure and smack a lot of pressure all of a sudden on certain type of coal and pow, and you get these diamonds. It's the ones they use in drilling and so on nowadays. So man has become a master of his world here in minerals and elements, and he's turned around and he's able to make not only crystals and the way this is derived, and they've worked it the other way around. It's how you make crystals. When I was a kid, I had things that you could make different kind of crystals. Slowly build up over time. Oh, the simple experiment was just make super salted water and then let it evaporate and it turns into little crystals up here. But no, there was those cool magic castle and things like that, if you remember. Yeah. Oh, back in the day, that was certain alchemical experiments and so on. Well, we have that dye that we talked about, and certain dyes got outlawed and everything, and it's because there's something toxic involved with them, and it may not be toxic to have in paint and do everything else, but you sure as hell don't want to be putting it in foods to make them redder, and necessarily putting it on clothes on you either, and then sweating and doing things. And no, you don't want to have that. So luckily we've derived all this out of it, but there's a way to get that quicksilver, and that quicksilver can make you a quick amount of gold, because we talked about ancient Chinese and the first people that are building pyramids in Tarim Basin area that were really liking that silver and had whole rivers of quicksilver and things that were made into it. And so you can imagine at the price of gold and how much it'd be worth. Something good, and it's just a byproduct and a way to take the poison part out of it, but also there's so much more to it. One of the strangest things that are so much more to it is it actually has to do with Saturn and all of his aspects that go along with it. And in fact, surrounding this picture is a circle of life, and people getting old and father time in this situation, and people are supposed to be able to look at this whenever they know some of this aesthetics and glean a certain amount of information out of it. I tell you, there's another level to this onion. In fact, there's a couple that are still left to this onion. And what's Mercury got to do with it? And what's Mars and fire and everything? Well, you got to fire up the brimstone to cook the thing that you break down from the acid to do chemistry in a certain way, in a certain order, and boom, and then heat it back up in a bisque, and you've got this perfect red powder that you can use, but also a byproduct of quicksilver. There's a lot the way that they procured mercury for thermometers and things up until recent days. Now they really want to do it with alcohol and a different slight banding number. But that's the way it was done from a long time ago. Like, share, and subscribe, and enjoy. Peace.